a really versatile technique, and you can see this is an example of a pretty good average size. So they're for small cups or bowls, but the thing that's really great about pinch pots is that you can combine them in different ways. So they can be used for both functional, like cups and bowls, and you could add on in different ways to make them a little larger, but you could also use them in sculptural senses by, say, combining pieces together. So here's how you would get started. So you're going to start with your clay, and I generally want like a fist amount of clay. Any larger and it gets kind of hard to manipulate. And it should be wedged, and then it needs to be shaped into a ball. So I generally start by patting it, tapping it on the table. And then I'll often, once it's sort of like square shaped, switch to patting it in my hand. Now I haven't wedged my clay, so it is a little bit more messy. So you would want to wedge it first so that it is well combined. But for a demo purpose, this works. So patting, if you wear rings, they will start to make marks, so you might want to take those off. So then I have my ball of clay, and you can see generally the size that I have here is going to make something around this size, maybe bigger depending on how thick or thin you end up making it. So pinch pots are pretty self-explanatory in terms of you're pinching them to make a pot. So I'm going to take my thumb, and it's up to you if it feels more natural, left versus right. I'm going to put my thumb into my ball of clay, and I want to try and get it as close to the middle as possible. So that's what you see right here, right? If I cut this in half, this is what it would look like. So then I need to pinch. So I'm going to use my fingers on the outside, and I'm going to pinch a little bit. You might be able to see I've made a slight indentation. I'm going to rotate it a little, pinch again, rotate, pinch, and that's pretty much it. Now this clay is getting kind of dry, and so you can see that I'm already getting a fairly significant crack here. Now I can either see if I smooth it and if it will stay recompressed, then that's great. But if I'm starting to get a lot of cracks, then I might need to actually get some new clay that's a little more damp. So do pay attention to your clay, and also how long has it been out. So I'm pinching and rotating. So I've gone from this initial kind of first thumb in, and now here I am. I've started to pinch and rotate, and that has stretched it out. And I'm going to continue. Here I am, sorry. Step one, step two. So you can see I'm just focusing on this, what's currently the top. It will eventually be the bottom of my pot, but the way that I hold it, it looks like the top. And I'm focusing just on that top portion, so it's still really thick down here. And I'm going to, by continuing to pinch around, once it's thinned out here, then I'm going to move my thumb down a little bit, my whole hand actually, until I'm starting to thin out this area. And so that's what's happened here, right? So I've moved so that I'm focusing more of my pinching down on this lower portion. And I'm just going to keep doing that until it evens out, right? So it's starting up near the top, going around, getting it nice and even near the top before I then focus a little lower down to thin it out, and continuing along that way. So for pinch pots, it's really about a lot of focus on what I'm doing. It does take practice, and what you're partially doing is training your hand to feel the thickness of the clay. So here's a really common mistake that I see. You start here, and you never really address this part properly. So if I just left it like this and started pinching on the side and not really on the top, I would end up with something a little bit more like this, where it's really thick on the bottom. Now I could fix that later if I wanted to carve that away, but it means that I lose a lot of potential clay that could be stretched to make a much larger or deeper pot. And it also is going to be a lot heavier, so if this was a finished piece, it's not going to hold that much, but it's going to feel like it's really heavy compared to how much volume it holds. So that was because when I was pinching, I didn't focus on the area up here at first. And now in this small piece, I can fix that, but if I was making a larger pinch pot, they get large enough that they stop here, and I can't actually reach very easily up there anymore. So that's something to keep in mind as I'm pinching, is make sure I'm paying attention to the top portion, which will become the bottom portion first, before I start moving my hands downward. Another really common challenge that I see people encounter is if it's cracking, right? People want to immediately add a lot of water, and that doesn't really fix the problem, because at that point you're just getting the outside surface damp. It's really the whole clay that needs to be fixed. So I might mist this whole thing down and wrap it up to give it time to reabsorb some of that water, instead of misting it and then trying to work and all of a sudden my clay is really slick with water on the surface. Or like I said before, if I notice it right away, I might just need to start over with damper clay. So your clay should feel kind of sticky, not super dry when you start working. The other thing that I see happen a lot is that things start flaring out. Now, if this is a shape you're going for, that's great, but a lot of times this happens by accident. And the way that happens is the position of your hand. So you can see right here, if I'm holding my fingers at a fairly straight angle, that's naturally the way that my pinch pot's going to be shaped. Whereas if I want something to stay nice and curved, I'm going to hold my hands in a really much more curved shape as well. So really paying attention to the shape of your hand and how that impacts the overall shape of your piece, right? The other thing that I always do is I will cup it in my other hand to kind of help guide it. And whenever I'm not working on this, I never place it on the eventual bottom yet, because over time it could kind of sink down with gravity if my clay is fairly soft. I always put it upside down on the rim, as you can see here, until I'm all the way done and I actually start working on the bottom. So here I have my pinch pot, and I'm probably at this stage if I were to cut it in half. So it's looking pretty good. It's a little bit thick. You kind of have, I call the rule of thumb. You don't want clay any thicker than your thumb in general. Otherwise it gets really heavy. It uses a lot of clay. It takes a lot longer to fire. As for a pinch pot, if you want to make something functional, if this was going to be a cup, I would aim for something that was maybe pinky thickness, right? So I need to thin this one out a little more. If I'm making something sculptural or a cup that I wanted to carve into, then I would want to keep it a little bit thicker so that I had a little bit of wiggle room. Say I was carving into this piece and I carved like halfway, I wouldn't want to have to carve a hole into it if I was just doing surface designs. So think about your end result as you're paying attention to the thickness of your clay. Now, if I'm not sure how thick the bottom is, I could check with a needle tool. I would put this on the table. I would put my needle tool through until it touches the table. The key thing is that I would take my finger so that it touches the bottom, so that when I leave it holding here, when I pull my finger and my needle tool out, I could use this to tell me how much clay I have, right? So how thick is the bottom I have here. So if I did that on this piece, I could see that I had about a pinky thickness or maybe a little bit less. The other great thing about pinch pots is you really don't need very many tools, at least to make fairly simple shapes. You'll want a needle tool, and I do really like using paddles as I'm starting to get more detail out of them. So as you can see, I'm just going to keep pinching, and that's all there is to it. So it's about really paying attention. If something's not working, maybe stop and give your process a little extra attention. So if something's not working, I'm going to stop for a second, make sure that I'm really attentive. Where is my hand? What am I doing? And then start my pinching process and notice what's going on, right? Is there something I'm doing that could be contributing to what's going wrong, or is the clay feeling differently? So it isn't a mindless exercise until you've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. So that is pinch pots. And if I cut this in half, let's take a look at it. So I find it really helpful every so often to cut a pinch pot in half just to get some visual feedback, especially when you're learning and you haven't developed that feel. So you can see here, I could maybe even it out a little bit more right there, but your goal with a pinch pot is to have an even wall, right? From one end to the other, from here to here, and even on the bottom, right? So we don't want that really thick bottom. And you want something between thumb and pinky thickness, right? And that's pretty much it. In later videos, I will show you how to finish the outside so it's smooth, how to even the top. This is just about forming the pinch pots, and then what we do from there depends on what you're ending up choosing to make.